Hello, everybody. Today has seen the UK Supreme Court rule that the legal definition of a woman is based on biological sex. That is the ruling that's come through earlier on today. And a couple of people have been in touch with me just to ask what my take on this might be as someone who works in DE&I and talks about related issues at work a lot. My response is, first of all, one of real sadness, because I have trans friends and I can't imagine what it must be like for them to have their identity questioned in the media in the way that inevitably it is being. I do think that if people just knew a few more trans people, as I mentioned before, we were talking about trans visibility only very recently, only a few days ago. I think if they knew more trans people, they'd see them as three-dimensional human beings, and all of this would be simpler and easier. Perhaps there would still be some complexity to it. What I find particularly difficult about this is that surely, if you have a situation where you have people who have been born and assigned a particular gender at birth, but then subsequently we realize that psychologically, their psychological understanding of their gender and of who they are is not the same as their physical gender. And the medical establishment, a medical establishment that you would trust on just about every other issue if you went to them, to be treated for a serious illness, heaven forfend, but if you did, you would trust their authority. An issue that they have decided is, something that's legitimate and completely deserving of compassion and of course, the help and support that is appropriate in that situation. If that's the case, then we have to understand, and surely in a compassionate and sensible and intelligent and rational world, and maybe that's my mistake, but surely in a situation like that, we would put steps in place to make sure that those people could live in the identity, in the gender, in the live their lives as feels comfortable for them. I totally understand that in certain circumstances, rare circumstances, but specific circumstances, where people have abused same-sex spaces, and that trans people have abused the situation that they've been in, whether that's been in prisons, and people who campaign against this point to these specific examples and go, look, this is what happens when you let men into single-sex spaces that are designated for women. And those are sort of cherry-picked and given as examples. But for those hundreds of thousands of trans people who live their lives every single day, to have it suggested that they are as much of a threat as those people are is just so saddening and so unjust. If somebody is going to abuse this thinking and policy on using same-sex spaces to go into women's toilets or changing rooms to assault or abuse women, or men for that matter, they're going to do it anyway. They're not going to wait for rules, for laws to be passed in order to facilitate it. They are the sort of people that are going to do this anyway. So to suggest that, all of these people who are just trying to lead their lives, just trying to live their authentic lives, are a threat to women or men in those spaces is just does not ring true to me. Just does not seem fair or just. And people say, well, look, there's a situation. What about in sport? I agree. I think this is a particularly thorny and difficult issue, but that doesn't mean that we just throw our hands up and say, well, look, let's not do anything about it. Do we move to a situation much more akin to the Paralympics, for example, where athletes are pitted against each other to make sure that it is a fair pairing, and that we do that across the board? We use the same systems for the Paralympics, the Olympics, and all sorts of sports. It's not lost on me how much work is involved in that sort of a shift. But in order to make sure that people are able to lead their authentic lives, then maybe that's the sort of thinking that we need to adopt. The saddest thing about all of this, of course, is that it emboldens, and I know that the Supreme Court said that transgender people will still have protection against discrimination, and that this should not be ruled as a victory for either party. Inevitably, it will be. And inevitably, those people, who are inherently transphobic will see this as a victory, and will use it to support. And they won't look at the detail. They'll just go, this is a vindication of all of us who said that you cannot possibly, have a man living as a woman, or a man or a woman living as a man, or anything like that, and that be legitimate. That's, it's all a load of nonsense. And I can't believe we're even talking about this sort of thing. Well, of course we're talking about these sorts of things. In the same way that somebody with blue eyes and somebody with brown eyes, when you look a little bit more closely, their eyes aren't completely and entirely blue or completely or entirely brown. Nature is not that binary. Nature is not that simple. Nature doesn't move in straight lines, no pun intended. It's always more complicated than that. And any sort of argument where people say, look, it's just one thing or another, sex is binary and that's it. That's what nature has told us. It's just not borne out by even the slightest examination. So, yes, I was asked for my opinion on it. That's what my opinion is on it. As always, I'd be interested to find out what your response is on it. And I want this to be as respectful a discussion, of course, as possible. As I said, one of the saddest things about it is that, there are people who are at home, people feeling particularly upset at the moment for obvious and understandable reasons, where their right to exist as they see fit is being discussed in the media. And is it for any of us to sit there and talk about it? I don't know, but we're not going to get anywhere unless we do talk about it and come to some sort of sensible conclusion, or continue to try and come to some sort of sensible